Morning. Thank you for being here. I'm pleased to be joined this morning with three of the people who really work in the trenches in Vermont with low and moderate income homeowners and those who aspire to be same, or some who want to hold on to the homes that they have. So with me is Grace Pasden, who's an attorney for Vermont Legal Aid and handles foreclosure matters around the state, and then two individuals representing 5 of the regional home ownership centers in the state. Luddy Biddle, NeighborWorks of Western Vermont, that's down in Rutland, and Chris Donnelly of the Champlain Housing Trust. Starting about 20 minutes ago at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., several of my fellow attorneys general, joined by U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder and HUD Secretary Donovan, began the announcement of the largest joint state and federal settlement in our history, a settlement with the 5 largest mortgage lenders in this country, and a settlement that could mean up to over $30 billion primarily in relief to homeowners around the country and in payments to the states. Either all 50 states or 49 states plus the District of Columbia are part of this settlement. The provisions of the settlement that will bring relief to homeowners will result in anywhere from $17 to $32 billion of relief there. And that could mean principal reductions of outstanding mortgages, support for refinancing in today's historic low mortgage rates, and other forms of relief. For those who have been foreclosed against between January 1 of 2008 through December of just this past year, there will be payments of approximately $2,000 per former property owner who's been foreclosed against. Most importantly, there are 42 pages single-spaced of new servicing standards that these lenders, who are responsible for most mortgage loans in this country, will adhere to going forward. And these would include only one point of contact within the lender or the servicer when a loan is distressed and foreclosure has been commenced. That there will be no dual track procedures where one part of a loan servicer is moving forward with a foreclosure and another part of that same mortgage lender or servicer is working on loan modification with the property owner. There will be no robo-signing, which we saw here in Vermont, where representatives of these lenders were signing affidavits in foreclosure proceedings when they either didn't even have a file in front of them or they had no personal knowledge of what they were attesting or swearing to. We saw these kinds of problems in Vermont, and as a result of this settlement today, the servicing industry and the servicing standards will change very dramatically in this country. There are those who say that mortgage foreclosures in the United States have slowed down since this joint state-federal investigation began, and these negotiations with the industry began in roughly December of 2010. But now that this settlement has been reached, it is predicted that the tide of foreclosure filings will increase significantly in this country. These new servicing standards will apply to new foreclosure proceedings. Vermont, the states will receive payments also. Vermont will receive about $3.6 million of that $3.61 million will go to our Department of Banking, Insurance, Securities, and Healthcare Administration. And some potential good news to the folks behind me. I believe that $200,000 of that money that's going to BISCA is going to be allocated for financial relief to the home ownership centers. You can confirm that with Commissioner Reardon, Secretary Spalding, or Commissioner Kimball, but that's the plan from what I understand. The rest of the state funds are unencumbered. They may be used for home ownership issues or for other state needs. One of the things that's important to know about this settlement is what it does not do. And first, it does not release any criminal liability on the part of anyone in the lending industry. It also does not halt the investigation of, nor ultimately prosecution, state or federal, of any violations of state or federal law relating to the mortgage loans bundled together as securities. And there are those who think that these shaky loans that were bundled together and sold and continued to drive up the prices of housing was largely, the collapse of that industry was largely responsible for the recession that hit us in late 2008, and that we still are paying the consequences for. Among the homeowners that will be entitled to relief under this settlement are those who have what are called underwater homes. An underwater home is one in which you have a mortgage and you owe more on the mortgage than is the value of the home you're living in. And now, one thing that's fortunate, and although the folks behind me can speak to the situation in Vermont, is that relatively speaking, and absolutely, Vermont has about the lowest number of underwater properties in the country, just about the least number of foreclosures in the time period, the 2008 through 2011 time period, and relatively speaking, the least number of distressed loans right now. That does not mean that these problems do not exist in Vermont, but in California, for example, the estimates are that there are 2 million properties so-called underwater, and I think I heard that there's 100,000 estimated in New York State. So we're not anywhere near as bad off as other states, but for those experiencing these kinds of problems, as these folks behind me know, it's a challenge day in, day out to try to hold on to your property, stay current in your loan obligations. We're not just relying on the good faith, the promises of the industry here. There's going to be a national monitor who has experience in consumer protection, who will have real authority to make sure that the industry meets its obligations under this agreement. The money is not going to flow tomorrow. It's over a 3-year period. There are millions of Americans who could take advantage of what's offered here, so it's going to be a 3-year period with benchmarks for the industry to meet and penalties if they don't meet those benchmarks during the 3 years. The agreement's filed in federal court in the District of Columbia and will be able to be enforced as an order of the court. So before I turn it over to others to speak a little bit about this from their perspective, I did have the opportunity. I was asked to participate in some of the negotiations that have been going on in D.C., and I was down in D.C. a number of times for the negotiations. But in truth, from my office, those who've done much more work so far and will continue in this arena is my Public Protection Division Chief, Wendy Morgan, and Elliot Berg, an Assistant AG, who is in our Public Protection Division. So with that, I'll turn it over for some comments and then be happy to answer questions that you might have. So, Grace?
Good morning. As Attorney General Sorrell mentioned, my name is Grace Pasden, and I am a staff attorney in the Poverty Law Project at Vermont Legal Aid. And I just want to start out by saying what a pleasure it is to be here today. In recent years, there hasn't been a whole lot of good news on the foreclosure front, so this is certainly a welcome new development. In 2008, I was hired as the first Vermont Poverty Law Fellow to head up Vermont Legal Aid's foreclosure prevention efforts. And having been in the trenches and seen the devastating effects of foreclosure, not only on the families that are going through the process, but on Vermont communities in general, I think it's high time that the banks took responsibility for the foreclosure abuses that have made a bad situation that much worse in Vermont and across the country. Vermont Legal Aid is here today to support this settlement because it has the potential to help many homeowners across Vermont by preventing unnecessary foreclosures through refinancing and loan modifications. As Attorney General Sorrell mentioned, compensating the victims of wrongful foreclosure and requiring the banks to play more fairly in the foreclosure process. In the 3 years that Vermont Legal Aid has really been focusing on this type of work, we've provided legal services to 350 Vermont individuals and families at risk of losing their homes. And I'm very proud to say that in the overwhelming majority of those cases where we've represented clients in foreclosure, we've negotiated settlements that keep families in their homes with affordable payments under loan modification agreements. And in addition to the direct service work that we're doing, we're also engaged in advocacy and outreach efforts around strengthening consumer protections for Vermont homeowners. Most notably, in 2010, we worked with the Attorney General's office to pass the first foreclosure mediation law in the country that enforces the federal Home Affordable Modification Program guidelines. And while Vermont Legal Aid has had a lot of successes in the fight against foreclosure and has preserved homeownership for many low-income and moderate-income Vermonters, there's still a lot of work that clearly needs to be done in this area. The homeowners that I work with every day are hardworking Vermonters who, like many Americans, have fallen on hard times in recent years. Most of them have been financially impacted by unemployment, medical issues, divorce, and other personal tragedies, and through no fault of their own, they simply can't continue to make ends meet. Unfortunately, rather than working with these homeowners up front to come up with reasonable solutions that would benefit both parties, national banks have all too often referred loans to foreclosure, and they continue to do so at record levels. Because of limited resources, most Vermonters who are facing foreclosure are doing it without the benefit of legal counsel today. And in our experience, it's been a struggle to get homeowners the workout agreements that they're entitled to, even when they are represented. So without legal representation, we know that families are at much greater risk of losing their homes. The settlement announced this morning provides Vermont with a great opportunity to level the playing field for struggling homeowners. The servicing standards that Attorney General Sorrell mentioned briefly earlier that are going to be imposed on the banks are going to begin to address some of the common abuses that we see in the foreclosure process by requiring mortgage servicers to review homeowners for loan modifications before initiating a foreclosure proceeding, setting limits on abusive charges and fees such as late fees and forced-placed insurance, mandating principal reductions for struggling borrowers who are underwater on their mortgages, and ensuring that families don't lose their homes on the basis of improper or fraudulent documentation. While the settlement's a great step in the right direction, we know that we're not quite out of the woods yet, and certainly there doesn't seem to be any sign that the foreclosure crisis is going to be going away anytime soon. So there's going to continue to be a real need for legal services and advocacy to protect homeowners' rights and ensure that Vermonters aren't losing their homes when there are other common sense solutions available. Vermont Legal Aid's been at the forefront of the fight against foreclosure in Vermont, And despite our limited resources and ever-growing caseloads, we hope to continue to partner with the Attorney General's office and the state to preserve housing and protect Vermont homeowners. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Ludi Biddle, Director of NeighborWorks of Western Vermont. I'm actually representing the 5 NeighborWorks affiliated organizations called the Home Ownership Centers. Amongst the 5 of us, we cover and provide services to the entire state of Vermont. And we are yet another source of help to homeowners that are threatened or faced with foreclosure circumstances. We have been living on the ground that regular experience of working with foreclosure efforts that have been so frustrating: lost files, new case managers, contradictory advice to clients, and so forth and so on. We look forward to what will happen in the new world of dealing with foreclosure with the benefit of this settlement. The Urban Institute has recently finished a study that showed clients, customers, homeowners who availed themselves of the counseling services at the NeighborWorks programs finished the program with an average $176 per month increase over settlements or arrangements that were made without benefit of counseling. It's one indication of why it's a very good idea for a household to engage in our services. They're free and they are provided as a benefit to a resident of Vermont, along with the legal aid services where we've worked in partnership. Another part of the study showed the benefits accrued for staying in your home longer, having a greater opportunity or more chance that you'll actually get to keep your home, and a year later after a settlement having a more stable circumstance than households that had not received the benefit of counseling. So counseling is something that will be made possible through a portion of this settlement, and I seriously encourage anyone who is in that circumstance or knows someone in those circumstances to come to the homeownership centers anywhere in the state and take advantage of that. I also want to just add a point. We've worked, of course, with various banks on these circumstances over the last several years, and it's really important to note that Vermont banks and the Vermont banking community has always held a high standard and served our community well. And we've been held as one of the reasons we do have such a low foreclosure rate in comparison to the rest of the country. There were 5 reasons given, but one of the reasons is the banking industry has been so upstanding and genuinely honest and concerned about community. Another reason, we didn't overbuild, we didn't create more homes than we could absorb. There are a lot of reasons, and the 5th reason was that we had counseling, and we have education available to homeowners, and just with financial literacy, financial credit repair, all kinds of things. So if you're listening to this and you know someone in these circumstances, please tell them to avail themselves of the NeighborWorks Homeownership Center's work. And thank you for making it possible.
You're very welcome. Just a couple more points and then happy to take some questions. Excuse me. One of the beauties of the servicing standards and going into effect now with this new wave of foreclosures coming is that these will be nationwide new servicing standards. And so unlike the situation that Grace mentioned, where this legislature led the country by enacting a statute requiring mediation in the foreclosure proceeding, and query how long it would take to have these standards adopted legislatively in 50 different states, the beauty of this agreement is that this will essentially become the law in all 50 states as soon as this settlement is filed. We have been getting, I and other AGs have been getting communications from some folks who say don't sell out and make this agreement with these banks. And I appreciate those sentiments, but again, I go back to what this settlement does not do. That one, it does not relieve any potential criminal liability. This is just the loan origination and servicing alleged violations of state and federal law, and again, has nothing to do with the bundling of mortgages into securities, which is, in the words of one of the AGs at a meeting in DC a week or two ago, where the real money is. And just finally, I want to say that there's been some criticism of the legislature for getting out on a limb with passing statutes that are not upheld by federal courts, but we do have the 10th Amendment right to do that. This legislature has never been afraid to do it, and we don't always get sued, even unsuccessfully sued, when the legislature exercises its right to get out in front of the country and pass statutes. And as Grace suggested, the forced mediation is just another example of where this legislature has not been afraid to lead the other 50 states and the federal government. I will say that there are some links in the press release to some websites that are to provide information to for information on the settlement. I think there's some phone numbers there for the big lenders. Obviously, the home ownership centers and Vermont Legal Aid will have this information. We will have it available on our office website and our Consumer Assistance Program website. But one of the, an email address that we had a little bit of problem with taking up, but we think is now okay.
It used to be this, and that's what it is, actually.
All right, we put one in the press release that had an asterisk next to it because we had some problems with it. It should read www.National Foreclosure Settlement. National Foreclosure Settlement, and that's probably .com, but I'm not sure.
Yes, and it's corrected on our website. So if you pick up the press release from our website, it has the right address on it.
Any questions for me or any of the folks behind me? Chris, you didn't have a second. Okay. But feel free to answer a question.
How many homeowners will this benefit in this case?
Well, the question is, I think we had, of qualifying foreclosures, the bank's estimates to us were something over 200. In terms of the distressed properties that are either underwater or the individuals are financially unable to refinance today's interest rates, I defer to these folks for their estimate on those.
I only know in our service area, which is Addison, Bennington, and Rutland County, we have recently served 196 clients with counseling services, and I think we've accomplished modifications for, I think it's 98 households. So that's 98 households that we've avoided foreclosure for.
And that's before this large infusion of money that will be available, with obligations on the part of the 5 largest mortgage lenders to get this money out the door in a timely fashion, or they will need to pay extra penalties to the government. So easily hundreds and likely thousands,
Yeah.
I think, is a fair estimate.
What is our foreclosure payment?
I don't.
There are foreclosure statistics on BISHCA's website, actually. They keep track of the monthly foreclosure filings in each of the counties. And I think Attorney General Sorrell mentioned earlier that the numbers had gone down a little bit in this past year after the robo-signing scandal broke and banks sort of put the brakes on foreclosures for a little while, but we're starting to see that trend increasing again. I think it was at a peak of 2,000 cases filed in 2009 or 2010, and it's gone down by a few hundred since then. And as I mentioned earlier, it looks like it's going to start going back up.
I don't know the exact percentages, but I understand from discussions with other AGs as we've been looking at the payments, the allocations to states, that Vermont, although having a number of these distressed loans and a number of cases that have been foreclosed against, is about the bottom of the country in terms of absolute numbers and relative to the percentages in other states.
Or you could say that we're at the top.
Or we're at the top, yes. And I do want to touch upon something that was also said about the Vermont banks. Understand that some of those who are pushing against this settlement, saying, encouraging me and other AGs not to settle, I don't think they're aware of the fact that for the national banks, the Vermont Attorney General has virtually no jurisdiction or authority to take enforcement actions for their interactions with individual borrowers. That's not the case for the federal government, and not the case as it relates to state banks. But the state banks have been very solid citizens, lending locally and then trying to fix problems locally, and that is in no small part why our foreclosure and distressed loan rates are as low as they are.
So were these 5 banks then just not major players in our mortgage markets? The 5 banks that were just settled against?
Do you know the answer to that?
I don't know at what rate, but I know that many of our clients are dealing with loans from these 5 banks.
These 5 banks are the gorillas in the closet of mortgage lending in this country. The next 9 combined is a very small percentage than the numbers for these 5. What their numbers are in Vermont, I can't say, and part of that information is more available from the banks because of our lack of state authority to enforce against the national banks.
And one of the reasons that so many clients end up with these 5 banks is that these 5 banks were buying mortgages, remember. So you could take out your mortgage with one bank and end up in this huge morass of this banking world that.
So no estimate of the percentage
I
of
don't
Vermont
know.
mortgages that are currently serviced by these 5.
I don't know
I
that.
can confirm, though, of those 350 cases that we've looked at, the majority of those are loans that are serviced, at least serviced by, if not held by, those 5 major banks.
So all 50 states are involved?
We've gotten confirmation that Delaware has signed on, and yes, it is all 50 states plus the District of Columbia.
So this was 3 in the morning?
Yeah, it was. I actually sent some email to a couple of my folks at 3:30 this morning.
So, a lot of problems here throughout the process. But can you just give us an example of how it typically went, or one of the most egregious abuse, how it would unfold for a homeowner in trouble?
Well, Grace would know better than I, but from what I heard at the negotiating table in Washington was not only the robo-signing, this sort of mass signature of sworn documents, particularly important in so-called judicial foreclosure states where you have to go through a court, as is the case here, where the person, when you swear to the truth of what you've just signed, and one, you don't have a file and you know nothing about what's in there, you're just attesting a signature, that's essentially a fraud on the court. But then, particularly with these large banks, large lenders, as opposed to your local bank, a number of borrowers found themselves with a foreclosure action going, and then a request, would you like to try to work this out to modify your loan? And yes, and that was a separate section of this same lender, and they weren't talking to each other, and so the person being foreclosed against thinks he or she is working out the loan at the same time that the foreclosure proceeding is moving along. And then there were these fees that get added on to your liability the longer it took as the loan, the distressed loan was going through the foreclosure proceeding, and so you ended up owing a lot more than was even the principal, outstanding unpaid principal amount of the mortgage.
And add to that, every time you call, you speak to a different person because they switch personnel all the time or have a new person dealing with your file. Add to that it's lost every time you call, or maybe that's an exaggeration, at least every other time. Add to that, you'll get conflicting advice. You'll be told you can't qualify for this package unless you're delinquent, so stop paying your mortgage. And then to qualify, and then you stop paying your mortage,
And it's
on
catch-22
this side,
or whatever
They
that-
take you to court, and you've got all these added fees. It's been Byzantine. I don't know how else. I mean, we have to be here till tomorrow to hear 5 different stories.
And there will be again a single point of contact for a distressed loan to deal with any of these huge banks.
So you mentioned defending state laws, so we have to ask, have you made any decision on it?
No, have not made a decision on that. We've gotten slowed down a little bit because we wanted to consult with a nationally known law firm that does a lot of federal appellate work, and we had some issues where we had to get some permission from other of their clients to waive the ability to do that. We've gotten that now. Those discussions are ongoing. We have actually, given the fact that our date runs on a weekend and then there's President's Day, I think we get to the Tuesday, the 21st or 2nd, whatever that Tuesday is our deadline day. And we'll meet the deadline for sure.
But no decision this week?
No decision's been made yet, and it won't be a decision that's made under the radar, if you will. I mean, we'll stand up and tell you what we're doing and why.
What's the name of the law firm?
Kellogg Huber out of Washington, D.C. David Frederick, who's a very experienced U.S. Supreme Court practitioner, is the main attorney we're dealing with, and one of his partners.
Not this week, so likely next week.
Pardon me?
Likely next week.
If not next week, then it will be, since the President's Day is a day off or state holiday, it would be that Tuesday.
Why did you choose them?
I'm sorry?
Why did you choose them?
Because they're very, very well respected. David Frederick argues he's another Kathleen Sullivan. I guess that's the shortest way to put it.
But they're not handling, I mean, you were just consulting them about the
At this point, we're just consulting with them about the appeal. If we decide to appeal, then the role that that firm might play in the appeal is something that also remains to be seen.
Is the $2.7 million that might be garnered for the state for this particular settlement that we discussed today, could that money be used to defer the cost in like a future?
Whatever the legislature wants to do with the money. It's actually $3.7 million, $1 million that goes to Bishka and $2.7 to the state generally, but I did mention the $200,000 that I understand that Bishka, with the approval of Secretary Spaulding and Commissioner Reardon, are going to set aside or allocate for the home ownership centers, that the rest of the money is there. Obviously available for home ownership issues or property ownership issues, post-Irene issues, or other issues, whether it be Entergy or whatever. It's up to the legislature and the governor.
Could you explain why you didn't depose lawmakers?
You mean in the Entergy case?
Yes.
Well, that was a strategic decision, and we felt, bottom line is, we felt that controlling U.S. Supreme Court law was such that, and the U.S. Supreme Court said in the California case, don't go into the weeds of legislative history, that for us to be arguing, don't go into the weeds of legislative history, and yet we're going into those weeds through depositions and such, that it didn't make sense. Now, that being said, we listened to hundreds of hours of tape of legislative proceedings. So we knew what was in the legislative record, and we cited numerous statements in the legislative record to the court that Judge Murtha chose not to give the weight to that we expected and hoped that he would. And rather, he took a couple dozen or so statements that Entergy put in the record on different drafts of different bills in different committees at different times, and essentially reached the conclusion that those 24 or so statements, largely by unnamed legislators, spoke for 180 legislators and the governor who signed it, or signed them. Yes, Huber.
Bill, back to the foreclosure settlement, you said that there are some groups urging the AG's not AG.
No, there have been. I think it's part of the Occupy Wall Street group, and so over the months there have been a number of statements. Please don't make this settlement of the view, I think, the misunderstanding of what was actually being released. And so really what those who know a lot more about this than I say was responsible for the collapse of Wall Street and the housing crisis we have now, it was those bundling of loans, the sales of those that at values that far outstripped their actual value and led to the collapse of investment banks and the housing market. And that's where the real money is. That U.S. Attorney General Holder announced a joint state-federal investigation of the securities issues, and as a matter of fact, there's a conference call at 1 o'clock today on that very issue. So that's where the real money is. These problems of process, once a decision was made by these lenders to foreclose, were violations of various state laws. This settlement, which is arguably well in excess of what we could have obtained had we filed individual actions against them, and relief that we wouldn't have gotten for several years. You talk about David versus Goliath. Vermont versus Bank of America is a tough fight. And at the end of the day, we wouldn't have these servicing standards in effect as of tomorrow, which dramatically will change the processes to be filed, the procedures to be filed for this new wave of foreclosures that are being predicted will start to be filed now, not only in Vermont, but around the country.
So who are the groups that have been urging you not to?
I'm not sure that they're organized groups. I didn't hear it as organized groups, individual emails and such, but a number of them. But we did put in the press release the national consumer groups and the NAACP that have spoken favorably about the agreement. And quite frankly, it wasn't until the last 24, 36 hours that a few outlying states that had said they weren't going to sign on, when they actually got looking at it, decided to sign on. Bringing California into the mix is huge because the property loan problems, the underwater properties that we're talking about in California dwarf everywhere else. The other big states are Nevada, Florida, Arizona, where they have so many foreclosed against properties already. Underwater properties, I think I estimated 2 million. I heard the estimate of 2 million in California. And this new wave of foreclosures is going to hit those states correspondingly harder than elsewhere because of the number of distressed properties.
On the hiring of this Kellogg firm,
Yeah.
I'm going to try to read between the lines there. If you
Sure.
follow me.
Well, we consulted with them during the leading up to the trial also. We've paid them, I think I mentioned that our roughly $400,000 cost compared to the $4.62 million by Entergy was about $180,000 within our budget, our staff salaries, and then about another 180,000 or so for outside experts and such. And I think we paid Kellogg Huber, don't hold me to the exact dollar, but about $50,000 for consulting us with our written submissions and our strategies in the trial.
Well, are you leaning toward an appeal? Does this represent that? Tell us that.
I hope what this represents is just very real due diligence on trying to make an informed decision on a matter of great public importance in this state, and we're taking it very seriously. We good? Thank you very much.